I have my paint laid out, and if you look really closely, you can see this broken color underneath, and I actually really love that effect, and I love to bring that into my finished painting. So if you can kind of imagine like a Daniel Bouveret or Bastien, I feel like, or even Fantin sometimes, Fantin Latour. I feel like sometimes they get that where you're getting these different kinds of pigments going over top of each other. So that's a big part of my aesthetic and my work that I really like. And that's um, only possible if you work in layers. So as I mix this first, kind of just as I'm mixing and kind of talking, keep in mind that that's the final colors can only be possible through a series of glazes, and I'll explain why. If you look at something like this here, I'm going to try to kind of explain it from the perspective of my artistic kind of inclination and my desire to want to replicate what I see up there. So what you see happening is you have in the living object, you have this transition that goes back and forth between a variety of different kinds of, I don't know the physics of it to be precise, but there's a different material that's producing a different color. So it's absorbing everything else and it's reflecting back to our eye, pink, magenta, or a yellow orange, that kind of understanding. So as I think about that and I want to try to reproduce that, then if I go back to my palette and show you my palette, you can see how that kind of mentality of those, that overlapping of pigments would then allow something more complex to occur. So with that said, I'm going to go to my palette and I'll be able to kind of illustrate as I'm trying to hit these notes for you that early on, my mentality is if I'm looking at something that's got pink, yellow, and orange in it, then it's smart to grab what you see. So you see pink, you see orange, and you see yellow occurring in nature. And I'll zoom in on that so you can understand it a little bit more. So as I'm mixing it out, you literally almost, it's like, it's a very similar thing that's happening in nature. Do you see that? Now, can I put my finger on exactly what it is? Not exactly. Not precisely, because nature is extraordinarily complex. And if I were to break out, you know, a either like a magnifying glass or a microscope, it would allow me to see these super tiny particles that I may not be witnessing in person. And then if we move the flowers, which it's nice to have the opportunity to move things around, if I move this, you can see, then you can start to see the transition from the, you see the yellow-green from the stem, it goes up into the petal itself. So it goes, this transition from green up into here. So my way of thinking is I want the same thing to happen on my palette. So how do I do that? we go back over here, and I can keep the same brush because I'm searching for a neutral yellow, a yellow, and a bright green. Okay? So if we go back to a close-up of that, that's the start of something interesting. If I continue on with the yellows and the greens, I can go back and forth between warm and cool and decide what exactly is happening in the stem. So this area right here, where you see that section there, that's like I was saying earlier, where this part kind of bleeds into the saturation of the color up in the flower itself. When these are really, it bleeds up into the petal and the flower itself. And when these are young, when they're really tight, they're closed and the pigment has not fully kind of, like if you look behind, this is opening up and the pigment is just incredibly intense on that section. But on the stem, and if we continue, if I can push this over, pull this, this is one where the flowers have dropped off already. So if I can get that in focus and just leave it and think about, okay, so this is the green we're seeing, and then the green comes, I know that's out of focus, but the green comes back up into the plant, the tulip. So if I'm here, then what I want to do is I want to transition over. So we'll just continue to think about this as one object, and I'll make that transition over. So now I have this interaction of, if I were to look at that very close, this transition from stem to object is exactly what I'm witnessing up here. If I were to take this out and bring it over so you could see the transitions, it would make more sense. You see that? And so that's an example of existing in color space and understanding how to match a color with, it was literally a couple seconds and understanding where my position of my pigments are. Now, can I do that for other flowers? Of course. So you just keep kind of thinking about, if we take this example of maybe even these two. So I'll go to, sorry about all that kind of back and forth here. So you'll see here, here, here. So you get these, this is a different, if you were looking through and your eye was back there where the camera is, and you were looking through, you would look at your painting and you would see a lesser saturated yellow, a deep yellow, greens, and white. So the way I would mix that is I would pull over up here my yellow section. So I pull out the yellow section because this is the pink violet tulip. Take a lot of white because white is going to desaturate as you mix the paint into it. So right there, that gives you kind of a starting point for the new color harmony. So think of that as being some of the high points, and then I'll just take this and I'll mix it. So I have a little bit of the other color in my brush, but for the most part, I'm grabbing like a lot of cad yellow pale. That starts to make a different transition, but then I have to go down into a darker note. So the options before me, if I look at it, you see these oranges. But for me, if you look over to the right where this is opening here, I feel like a translucent warm would work really well. So oftentimes I will grab burnt sienna instead of the magenta and start to get those deep notes in there like that. Now it may be slightly warm, so you can either choose to desaturate it with the raw umber, or for me, I think it's a bit more kind of sophisticated of a color harmony to branch out and create another section of the brown and green and see how you can kind of leave that broken and experience a lot of the quality of the brokenness of the color in this. If you would depends on which way you look at it, but if it's in shadow, see it takes on that dark green in the stem. If it goes into shadow, it gets darker. If it's in light, it's brighter. So if it's brighter, it go up towards these notes. But then if you look on the inside also, the inside has stuff going on. So if we go back to this other angle, if I go back to seeing kind of the inside, you see the green in there, but because it's existing within the context of all this bounced light, it's not as green as, say, this one that doesn't have any, it's existing in the light by itself. So if it's in a contextual situation where it's going to be a different kind of note. Because of that, that would allow for this kind of thing where you could grab a note within the space and it would be a very similar, it would, meaning that it's kind of exist in this ambient zone of, it's kind of warm, it's kind of green, it's a little bit of both. And then if you go back, there's a dark note in here that would, you could choose, you could have raw umber to make that dark. If you want it to be a neutral yellow, you could have burnt umber, which makes it a bit more red. And then you could have black and burnt sienna, which would be still red. You see that? But then that harmony existing in this section is what I'm mixing for this part here. Now I'll continue on because there was a section that had the whites behind it. So if you're looking in your painting and the stuff that is behind, so you're gonna notice, you're gonna pick up some of these things that happen. The white and the green. So the way I float around on my palette in that situation would be I would start to go back up towards, I would grab, that has a lot of the brown in it still, so I want to clean my brush and I want to open up the greens and the yellows and maybe add something, a different spectrum in there, because if you want to have broken color, you could add a bit of the violet to make the cool grays. So if I go back to this section, the violet is an artistic choice. It doesn't fully exist in nature. This is just a cool gray. But if you're making an artistic choice to emphasize kind of that vibration between the green and the cool shadow, you can get these kind of cool vibrations of having different pigments occur. Now that's an artistic choice that you would implement because you'd want to emphasize that kind of emotional reaction of what was happening in the area that you were painting. Now if I get this out of the way and I look at this, what you realize is there's actually some cool gray notes in this part that, I don't know if you can see it with the light there, it's not entirely in on that camera angle you can't really see it, but maybe on this one you could, where you start to pick up those violet notes in there. So if you go to the close-up, if I can kind of put this here, you want to break it, but if I put that there, you can kind of pick up the color harmonies in that section. Now it's exaggerated. It's much more neutral in the stem itself. So I could add black. I could have black and white, and that would immediately kick it into kind of that neutral, this neutral area. See that? So that energy, the essence of that kind of decision making of this color could exist in the shadows, or it could be brought down to the actual note that you're seeing, is an artistic choice that would emphasize your emotional understanding of nature. So there's the science of it, and then there's the human component of our emotional reaction to it. And how do we translate that? How do we get that across to the viewer? Now, this blue is not part of the mixtures, so I can just go through, start thinking about some of these greens. I can add the raw umber, viridian, and I can mix out some of the greens that are taking place. Add blue and black, yellow, and see, you can kind of get those different kinds of green, more neutral, and those would show up in many parts of the setup. If you go back into sections like this back here, I point for you that area right back there. If you were looking through the bouquet and you saw something like that, that's a neutral blue green, and that's what we've mixed here, which is I used raw umber, viridian, black, blue, and the cobalt blue to get it. You just kind of cad yellow pale, you just kind of mix these things and it goes around in this area, and you start to find those spots. Now if you look immediately to your right where the stem is, that would then correspond with this here. The chroma on it's slightly higher. I'm talking about these stems as you look through in a section like this here. So if you look, you can make this just with a little bit of the viridian and yellow. You can get that up higher, and then that would be the color of the stem there. So there's many ways to kind of float around this highly chromatic environment that you're seeing in nature, which is this stuff here. Zoom in, focus on it. You see those kind of more orangey reds. You see some violets in there. So if I were to mix that, clean my brush, take the red, violet, and orange, and that's the mixture for this. And then the one to the left that has the broken color, which is this one, I would be able to think about how this area here would allow for moments of transition, of trying to figure out, okay, if I have a really yellow kind of area and there's orange in it, then I would want to do that kind of brushstroke where you take a yellow and you just make sure that some of the orange hits it, so that it's not the yellow greens, it's the yellow oranges that you're seeing. Yellow oranges into, if I were to take some of this stuff and like dab it, that's literally kind of the effect of what you're seeing there. That's why I'm always touching now. If I take the pinks and the white and I dab it on top of that, that's going to be the thing. Even to a higher extent here, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to take the white and the pink and make sure to add that, incorporate it into this mixture here. So that's white and pink, and so if you want that to be part of this kind of harmony on the flower, then that's the kind of notes you would be getting in this section. So this is an abstracted version of what, all this information, and then just kind of comes over to the area that you're painting, and it becomes how you think and process color. And then you always have a reference point of your completed painting. It's all of the abstracted harmony, all the broken color is perfectly organized right on your working space. I hope that it's valuable to you. I have color on my mind just because of everything kind of going on here. This was a beautiful gift from a student, student and friend, and I think that can add to conversations that we have continually on this platform. So if you're supporting, I just want to thank you, and I truly appreciate your being here and being part of this group. Until next time, let me know if you enjoyed it.